Do you think you've got what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys Radio. And on this week's show, we've got authors Jonathan Littman and Susanna Camp, and also Dr. Rebekah Louisa Smith. We're going to talk about their books on entrepreneurship and startups. It all starts at 8 p.m. Pacific Time on KCAA Radio here in Southern California. 102.3, 106.5 FM, 1050 AM. The podcast and my YouTube drop tomorrow. Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, we've got a very special guest today, Jonathan Littman and Susanna Camp. They've written this book called The Entrepreneur's Faces: How Makers, Visionaries, and Outsiders Succeed. And it's a terrific book, and it's really important right now that we talk about entrepreneurs on Guys Radio, because you know, this is a time where there's a lot of pressure on people with their jobs and needing to kind of think out of the box and do things in a new way. And whether you work at a big corporation that may be downsizing, or you're working remotely, or you're working on your own startup with your own vision, you've got to have that entrepreneurial spirit nowadays, whether you like it or not. So we've got two experts on here on Guys Radio. Let me tell you a little bit about my two guests, Jonathan and Susanna. Jonathan Littman collaborated with IDEO on the bestsellers The Art of Innovation and The 10 Faces of Innovation. And he's the author of 10 books. 5 of his books have been optioned for film, which is fantastic. And his award-winning journalism has appeared in Playboy, the LA Times, and Forbes. Susanna Camp, editor-in-chief of SmartUp.life. She's a journalist specializing in emerging technology, early leader at Wired magazine, and also has been on the staff of Macworld, PC World, Outside magazines. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Susanna, for being my guest on Guys Radio.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Robert.
So let's start right at the beginning. I mean, as I mentioned in the lead-in, it's a really troubling times out there, very chaotic, but with chaos often comes opportunities. So we're talking about entrepreneurs. What after doing all this research and covering the 10 different entrepreneurial archetypes, writing this book with so many different wonderful stories in it about people who've really made things happen out of nothing, or just have continued the story to build and build and build, what is your kind of definition of what an entrepreneur really is?
Well, we think you hit it the nail on the head. The pandemic has created all this chaos, and there's been a tremendous growth in new companies started, especially companies with more potential in the last few months, more than in the last 12 years. And there's just a huge amount of people who have to pivot, who have to change their business model. So people are trying to find their entrepreneurial way. And what we've discovered is actually there's more than probably one word. There's more than one kind of entrepreneur. We see 10 distinct archetypes.
Okay, there's a really cool quiz that you can take with the book or online at the website, and I did mine. I came out as an outsider. So why don't you talk a little bit about the different archetypes for entrepreneurs, and some of the definitions, and what type you guys are?
Sure. Well, I would say that the maker is the most iconic type of entrepreneur. If you like to tinker and make things, if you like to prototype everything from physical products to software products, odds are this is your type. Famous makers include Richard Branson of the Virgin Group, who's got dozens of companies. He's really a tireless inventor. Makers view mistakes as fast feedback, so they like to fail forward, which is a term that you hear a lot in entrepreneurship. And I, in fact, am a maker. I built the website and that little quiz that you took. So also,
I jump in. You said you're the outsider. Well, that is another very popular type.
mm-hmm.
The founders of Airbnb, of Uber, they didn't really know anything about those industries. They were outsiders. And we saw, Airbnb went public. It's worth more than, any other hotel chain now in the world. So you bring sort of this fresh beginner's mindset to an industry, and you're not a legacy person. You don't follow the rules. You will break things faster and find new business models. We also, another type we love right now is the collaborator. We're isolated and we can't have the same serendipity. So you have to up your game as an entrepreneurial person and figure out who to collaborate with and how, and how to use some of these new tools today.
Why do you think so many startups fail?
Well, so many restaurants fail. A lot of businesses that are trying to make a lot of money fail. It's always been the reality. Another reason so many fail is that a startup is not trying to be a good business or an average business. It's trying to be an extraordinary business. So when it succeeds, it might end up like Airbnb, which is worth more than $100 billion. But to answer the failure problem, it's usually the team. And then that's where our book comes in that there's usually a lack of recognition of the diverse archetypes, the diverse kinds of people you want in your initial core team of 3, 4, 5, 6 people. And you have too many of one type and you're missing certain core types.
You should know your strengths and weaknesses, and don't just stick with the strengths and then fail by not filling in those known gaps with people who can help you.
We were actually talking to a venture capitalist yesterday, and it's really often happens that there's a good product person, there's a good technical person, and a startup grows to a point where they actually need more of a classic leader, which is one of our types. And it's often hard, especially for a younger entrepreneur who's been perhaps so excellent in so many things, the technology, getting the funding, to recognize that they don't have the maturity or the experience, and they need to bring in a leader, or they need to do another thing we talk about a lot, is get coached and develop some of these capabilities of these archetypes.
Okay. In the book, you talk about the 7 stages of the ARC, the awakening, shift, place, launch, money, test, scale. It's really kind of the stages, the life stages of a startup, I guess. Could you elaborate a little bit on how did you discover these, why they're so important, and what people need to know about those ARC stages? Sure.
The early stages in the ARC are all about energy and building momentum. And that's where somebody like the athlete would really help you out. Outsiders too, in the beginning, sort of sizing up the field and figuring out where they can get an in. And evangelists will tell the story of your startup, tell the story of that product, and really win people over and start selling before you even have any real product to sell.
And the first stage is awakening. And I think a lot of us, we have this awakening. We have a great idea. A colleague has a great idea. We get all excited about it. And a lot of times we just fall back on the couch. We don't move forward. So you have to go to the second stage, which we call the shift. And that's where you actually do things. You start to think about, who the customer might be and how might I build the first early prototype. We have several other stages. Another stage is quite interesting today. We call it place. Now you might think there is no longer a place because we're all stuck at home, but there's a digital network place, and you have to find your place, which is you find your community, you find your customers, you find partners.
You might need to build that place. The conductor is one of the types who's great at actually assembling a network of all the people that he knows who have strengths in various areas.
And then it's sort of midway, a little bit past midway, you have to launch. And a lot of entrepreneurs, this is where they really get cold feet. This is actually stage 4. they're afraid of launching. And one big fear might be, let's say you have a good corporate job, you know, do I leave that lifeboat, right, and jump onto this little dinghy, this startup? And a lot of experts help them to figure out how to sort of bridge both. You might keep the job longer. This might be something you're doing at 10 to 1 in the morning, and then you launch. And then we have other classic stages that you have to go through. We have a whole stage we call money. And money is both about investment and finding the right investors, which is very key, but also finding the right customers, because you may not be able to get a lot of investment. You may have to drive, through revenue. Finally, we have test, which is where you really find out if this thing works, if it really makes money, if it's really going to be ongoing. And then you talked about how tough it is to be a startup. If you're lucky, you get to scale, where you really can have exponential gains.
Okay, my special guests on Guys Radio, Jonathan Littman and Susanna Camp. We're talking about their book, The Entrepreneur's Faces, How Makers, Visionaries, and Outsiders Succeed. How did you choose the subjects for your book?
It's a great question. We were both in San Francisco. We were going to, all these events.
Yeah, we were pretty deeply embedded in the San Francisco tech ecosystem. I have a huge network of ex-Wired people. And as you know, networks are exponential, so it just continues to grow and grow. We were going out to events all the time, and we began to realize that people were coming to Silicon Valley to learn the Silicon Valley mindset, and they were coming from all over the world. We wanted to see where those people were coming from. So we set off on a big tour of the world, and we traveled to 14 different countries. We interviewed hundreds of founders, and we settled on just 10 of those founders who were very unique and archetypal.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier something about stories. We're real believers that you learn through stories, and we wanted a different book. We didn't want it to be a story of one billionaire, a guru entrepreneur, but these 10 different types, which we think they're more approachable. You might imagine you're one or two or three of these people. And there, 4 of them are international. Actually, 2 are from Estonia, which is one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world. It's tiny. And of course, there are some here from Silicon Valley and San Francisco. We even had one from Paris and Finland.
Well, one thing that they all had in common is that they all knew how to tell their story. And in order to really win people over with these stories, we needed to find people who were evangelists about themselves. And I would give that advice to any founders or would-be founders out there. Know how to tell your story well, and that will get you a lot farther.
Yeah, and we saw this San Francisco. We could sell, something that's doesn't exist. There's no software, there's no product. And you go to Europe and other places, and they might have fantastic technology, but they can't market it. They can't sell it. They can't envision this larger future. Okay. And so all of our founders had that ability, and they all also went through lots of obstacles. It's, there are a lot of easier ways to go through life than be a startup founder. So they all had a lot of bravery and persistence.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Credibility to me is so important. I know in kind of in the podcast world, if you will, some people talk about downloads, but really the key to success is credibility. And when you're in business, and I've been in on the service side and advertising, and on the client side and manufacturing and consumer products, you really need, when you're starting up or have some type of an entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial, if you're in a big corporation, you're in new business or new products or whatever, you need to develop at a certain point that magic called credibility. Would you agree with that? And then what is the best way for entrepreneurs to get credibility? And the reason I ask that is in a lot of startups, they're referred to, okay, there's five guys in a room. And how do you get, the question is, how do you get beyond being five guys in a room, beyond just the resumes that the team has? How do you really get people to take you seriously, that you've got really something going on besides the technology itself?
Right. Well, the VCs and the angel investors always say the number one factor is they invest in the founders, in the team as human beings, and that it's not all about the technology or the business model. Credibility can come from being in a good incubator, a good accelerator. It can come from having first-rate advisors or a coach. Um, it can come from, as Susanna just mentioned, like how you tell your story, and not hype, um, but with real data and because one of the things in this process is you're going to get pushed back on your heels. You're going to have investors or customers asking you tough questions, and you might not have the right answer the first time. And what they will really credit you on is doing their hard work and coming back and maybe fixing a problem in your business model.
I want to say too, I want to add to that, that credibility comes from diversity, from assembling a diverse team and making better decisions because you have more voices. I mean, if you think about it, if you are your own first customer and you design a product only for yourself or for people like you, you're not really going to meet enough needs. So you need to have the self-awareness to know what you're good at, what you're not good at, and who's going to come in and fill in those gaps on your team.
Good answer. In terms of the aha moments when you were interviewing all these people and compiling the information for the book about what the consistencies were with the people who are successful. First of all, if you could talk about that a little bit, and then let's just bring that down to not down to, across to our listeners in terms of if they want to be entrepreneurs, what are those three foundational pillars that they really need to get started and do things, get off on the right foot, if you will.
Prototyping. You can talk all you want. You can do a business plan. Most of these people do not do business plans. They prototype. They get a simple product out there, and they test demand. I think that is a huge element in success. The other thing
I would say also empathy is very important. I did a little research on you, Robert, and your platform, and you talk about what's a guy's guy, right? And a guy's guy shows strength and leadership and discipline and power, but also emotional intelligence. And with emotional intelligence comes empathy. And I'm sure you know too that in sales and marketing, you've got to have empathy and really listen to your users and find out what they need.
And to build on that, listening, almost every entrepreneur in our book, the first model did not work. And I think that's really what distinguishes a more likely successful entrepreneur is that willingness to go, gosh, I had this great idea, but the first iteration of it, it's not right. And that's where it's so key to listen to the right advisor or the right coach and to find the next iteration and to have the courage actually to let go of that previous model and to change. And sometimes that means firing people, right? Because you may have hired people for a specific model and they no longer are relevant for your new model. One of our best entrepreneurs had to fire 3/4 of her company because her model completely changed. So that requires, a lot of courage and strength.
Do people have to look inside and ask themselves what type of person or archetype they are to have a shot at succeeding as an entrepreneur? I mean, nowadays with downscaling and so many people being out of work, everybody's has to, in my opinion, think that way. But a lot of people who've worked for major corporations for a long period of time, they are uncomfortable in the smaller environment where, you're really, you're being judged on what you bring to the table. You got to hunt to eat. And in the big corporations, a lot of times you can kind of get lost and hide in the shadows a little bit of the bureaucracy. And some people are very comfortable there, just kind of yesing their way along. And of course, everybody has to contribute and do things. But when you're in a smaller organization, 100 people or less, a lot of times it's more out there. Like if you're good, you're going to get rewarded and you're going to succeed. If you're not, there's no place to hide. Talk about that dynamic a little bit and why it's important for people to be able to look inside and ask themselves, am I right for being an entrepreneur or not?
Founders are like this. They really have to have all their wits about them. They have to be rounded and grounded and centered and humble. Um,
I would add that I think that we've found that you usually have a strong archetype and then an inspirational archetype. So I actually was a competitive athlete, a Division I athlete in college, and I'm the athlete. I'm not actually an athlete as an entrepreneur, but the athlete is the person who you throw them, in the middle of the week in a startup, and there's 5 new problems, and they love it. They love it that it's difficult. They love it that these are fresh problems to solve. But over the time, I've decided to become more of an outsider, which I think is your type, which is something I'm working on. So what distinguishes an entrepreneur, I think, from more of a more traditional corporate person is that you really embrace your strength, but you aspire often to grow as an athlete might grow or a musician might grow. And you also start to recognize the element Susanna mentioned, this empathy and humility, that you can't be the 5 or 10 people on the team. As good as you ever get, you're going to need 3 other stars.
Okay.
And you start to recognize that.
And one more thing to add, in business, archetypes are used by all kinds of people. The Jungian archetypes, the Myers-Briggs test, the Strengths Finder, the DISC. We really wanted to bring a model that was more holistic and more inclusive and didn't sort of pigeonhole people into one type or another, but help them to embrace all of their types.
Last question for both of you. I'd like to hear your individual perspective. If somebody says, I'm going to, I want to be an entrepreneur and want to start my own business, I need some advice, what would you tell them? Best advice?
Well, I'll go back to what I said a little earlier. Just know how to pitch yourself, how to tell your story well, how to move minds and hearts with your best narrative story about your origin, the origin of your company, and what really inspired you to bring that to the world to help people.
Got it.
One of our favorite characters in the book, his name is actually Joel Heath. His inspiration was he got fired, which can be a great time to be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
And he was married, and he put on his bathroom mirror 5 ideas for a new company. So every day he got up, while he was shaving, he had these 5 ideas right in his face. His wife got a little irritated by this, but it was great. And eventually he chose one of them and dug in. And it's not something to do on your couch, starting a company.
Got it. Okay. Jonathan Littman, Susanna Camp. The book is The Entrepreneur's Faces, How Makers, Visionaries, and Outsiders Succeed. It's really terrific. And you guys are great also. Tell everybody where they can learn more about you two, your books, and this particular book, where they can get more information and buy a copy.
Sure, Robert. Well, the book is available on Amazon. You can look it up by the title, The Entrepreneur's Faces, and find it there. The entrepreneursfaces.com website is where you can also find all the links to the book, all the links to our media, the articles we've written, and the podcasts we have been on, including this one now. Thank you very much. And you can take the quiz there at theentrepreneurfaces.com.
Jonathan, you want to add anything?
Yeah, we love to hear people telling us about their type and when they discover their type, what it means to them, maybe what they're aspiring to grow in a certain type. So
Okay.
We're on LinkedIn. We also like to hear from people there. We post a lot there.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for being on Guys Radio. I think you guys are awesome. And it's a terrific book and a lot of great advice for people. So check it out. Special guest. Her name is Rebekah Louisa Smith. She's got a book. It's called Born to Do It, Becoming the Leader of a Business Niche Using Powerful Spiritual Techniques. And Rebekah has a very interesting background. She began her career in the film industry about 10 or 12 years ago. She was in the National Horror Film Festival, and then she started her company, which is called the Film Festival Doctor. So she's actually helped a lot of aspiring filmmakers get their films into the right festivals and get viewed at the right festivals. And that's quite an achievement because it is a tricky business, the film business. Most people don't realize that it's in many ways, if you want to get a film made, it's all about the money. And that's why you see so many different producers, because the money comes from so many different resources. But unless you're working with a really, really big studio and they're all in on a movie. But for the most part, most of the films are kind of parsed together, all the financing. So Rebekah has also set up a company, the Film Festival Doctor, and where she helps those aspiring filmmakers. And she also has put this book together that really weaves in traditional kind of entrepreneurial startup practices with some spiritual aspects to help you really do a better job. And that's one of the focuses of our discussion today. So we're going to talk about her personal mentoring and her career and all other kinds of stuff on Guys Radio. So welcome to the show, Dr. Rebekah Louisa Smith.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was a great intro.
I took half the interview time for it, but sorry about that. But anyway, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. So the one thing that stuck out when I was going through all your materials was the horror genre. I know you're involved in film, and horror is such a specific genre. And I know some folks who they love horror, and other people just don't get it. And I'm kind of on the fence. I'm not into the bloody, gory stuff, but a thriller. Sometimes when you get a horror story where it really scares you, but they do it psychologically, like Hitchcock, I like that. I don't know if he would even be considered horror. But tell us about your love for horror, how you got involved in that, and how you got into the film business.
So it all happened by accident, that wonderful thing where it's like, wow, I did not expect that to happen. So I was studying for my PhD in Wales and Aberystwyth. And that's a very kind of lonely process when you write a PhD. I mean, it's obviously an interesting subject that you're doing, but it's very much like a solitude kind of thing. And I was very like a people person, and my good friend was asked to produce a horror film festival by the National Film Council of Wales, because there's no horror film festival in Wales. And they wanted to be in a particular area that in Aberystwyth, because there's lots of students there. So he was like, do you want to help out? And I was like, yeah, I'll something to do. And that something to do was actually, I've just found what my sole purpose is and my life's purpose. I should be working in the film industry and not in academia, because I have a passion for helping filmmakers get their films into festivals. And there was a big gap in the market. No one was actually doing this service that I offer at the time. There's only like one or two people, but it was a very, very under the radar kind of service no one knew about. So I wanted to make it more mainstream and a very like in-demand service. And that's what I've done. And other people do a similar thing to me, but there's not many of us. It's still very small. It's not oversaturated. And now I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, what my self-purpose told me to do. And it all came by accident, all by accident, totally unprepared and unplanned.
So before we get into kind of how you took those initial steps then, what's going on with the virtual festivals now? I know with COVID and the lockdowns, the big ones like Aspen and all the Sundance, they have to do it a little bit differently, and there's going to be a lot of virtual festivals. How's that work out?
That's right. So the virtual model is actually working really well. Festivals who know how to work it now are doing a brilliant job, and it's really great to see so many films available on this virtual model. So it tends to work in a way where it works better when the festival doesn't just rely on it being there online, but they actually do the social media behind it, they promote it, they have press about it. For example, right now as we speak, Sundance has moved hybrid, so there are some drive-in screenings around some parts of the US, but a lot of it is online, and it's working really well. You get updates every day about the little virtual village, and there's also a virtual VR room to go into, so it's very interactive and hands-on, and it's working really well. But you do need to help create a buzz, and that means relying on social media and doing that kind of thing to make it feel like it's part of a community, because obviously festivals are all about being as part of a group and a community and sharing that experience with people. Doing it online is very different, but it works when the festival makes it feel like a festival and not just a online screening. But
Do you think, do you think that for filmmakers, this can be a good thing, even if you know, we go back to a hybrid model or full on everybody's there in real time live, that having the virtual allows more films to be screened?
Yes, I mean, sometimes with some platforms, a lot of festivals can screen a lot of films at one time. So it does have a lot of advantages. And I think it's going to be here to stay, because a lot of festivals have said how useful the online model is, because they can actually reach out to more people, with it being like a global outreach for the industry parts of their festival. So, for example, with Aspen, they have an industry section where they have Q&As and masterclasses, etc. And they now can actually, you know, reach out online to more people than they could before, those that couldn't afford to fly in for whatever reason. So that's going to stay for a long time, but it won't replace the actual physical festival model. It's not possible.
Okay. Now, we talk about horror and film, and then the spirituality in a startup. So how did you kind of weave all that together when you were doing your own startup as an entrepreneur?
So when I first began my company, I didn't know much about spirituality, because I didn't know I found my soul purpose a few years later. I became more spiritually aware and in tune when I broke up with my ex-boyfriend at the time, and then I turned towards that area to help me recover and get positive, and to actually figure out how to manage the situation. It was quite stressful. And it was there where I learned all about soul purpose and also other techniques. And then I figured out that me running my own business, I am my business, I'm my brand. That is a fact. And I wanted, you know, the business is me. So I'm the one that steers the ship, you know, so to speak. And I realized that it's important to not just leave the business to the side when you're learning spirituality and work on yourself. You have to integrate that into your business as well. So then I began to actually be more positive when I began to integrate spiritual techniques into my business by putting it as part of the infrastructure. So
Okay, let's talk about a couple of those things. Energetic branding, what is it and how do you employ that?
I'm going to say that's a good example. I was going to say that for an example. So when I first started my company up, I had a really good logo. It had a woman on the front with a very cool afro, and she had like a film reel in her hair as a hairband. It was a very, very cool logo, and it was all black. And then I met a woman called Marie Diamond, who is the Feng Shui expert in The Secret, at a party. A friend of mine introduced me to her, who knows it very well. And I said to her, "Oh, this is my company. I started my company up a few years ago." And then she said, "Whoa, the energetic alignment is low." She said, "There's no color. And also what's happening here is that the woman has her back to your logo." So it says, where it says the film is a doctor, she's turning away from it. So really what you're doing subconsciously is turning your back to clients, because it's not facing in alignment with the logo. And it needs to change, otherwise you won't get anything. Or it will really, you know, have a detrimental effect and get more clients, even no matter how positive you might be. And also there's no color. I mean, it needs gold, it needs something to stand out, you know, and boldness to it. Right now it's shrunken away and you're turning your back from people when you want to help them. So the minute I spoke to her, I said, "Oh, I need to hire you for this." So then I worked with my supervisor, my designer, and he changed the logo for me. And since then, people can see it now, and they see it, and they recognize it, and they hear about it, and they're drawn to it. And before it was, you know, sinking down the surface. So that was a really big thing. And then she talked about color itself, about how important that is for branding, but also for yourself as a person, being a business leader. It's wrong just to wear all black and nothing else. You need to have that energy coming out of you, and you can tap into these abundant colors of the universe that she calls quantum colors. And she told me that, you know, gold is abundance, silver is magnificence. Putting these colors into your branding, into you and your clothing, will certainly make a difference to your energy. And it does. It's subtle, but it does.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our special guest on Guys Radio is Dr. Rebekah Louisa Smith. We're talking about her book, Born to Do It, Becoming the Leader of a Business Niche Using Powerful Spiritual Techniques, finding your niche and your soul purpose. You know, when somebody thinks about business niche, it's business. And when you think about your soul purpose, it might be something a little bit different than that. How do you kind of marry those two?
So the soul purpose is something that is in you, that you're born to do, that you put on this earth to do. You were born with it, literally. That's why the book is called Born to Do It. And the book tells you how to tap into that. Because when I was doing my PhD, I thought I wanted to do that, but other people told me I should, and I didn't actually want to. And then I realized that was obviously not what my body wanted, what my soul wanted through working at the festival. So a soul purpose is something that you wake up and you're drawn to something, whether this be kind of hobby or a subject or whatever, and you can just work on it for hours and time passes. You know, you lose track of time because you're so involved in it. And that's different from doing a normal job, because this is something which you really do put extra effort into because you're guided towards to do so. So it's not something that is just unique to you and I. It's everyone has it. You have to kind of tap into it, and that can take some time because it's not something you actually look for. But then when you do, you then get very well rewarded.
Okay. So let's see. You do marry the traditional business aspects of things and entrepreneurship in the book, key performance indicators, sales indicators, the BANT, the budget, authority, need, and time. And there's some nice exercises in the book to set everybody up. So what is the real path? If somebody's going to start a business now, their own business, and often people are becoming their own brands, and whether you work for a big corporation or not, you still kind of have to brand yourself. So what would be the steps, and in what order would somebody take to set their business up using your techniques?
So the first thing to do is figure out, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? So first of all, tune into your self-purpose. That's the first thing to do. And then when you think, yeah, this is really what I'm doing, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, it's then got to really home in on your niche. And then you can then start building the business. So when I say home in on the niche, for example, what for my niche is the film industry. We have to actually then really laser down that niche to a micro niche. So for example, for me, obviously the micro niche is film distribution, and then to really get specific, I work in the area of film festival distribution, helping my clients get their film seen in the right film festivals. So it's not like I work in film, yes, but what aspect, and then also what micro aspect are you an expert in that your purpose has called you to do. And the same with, say, social media. So say, oh, but I'm an expert social media. Which platform? You can only really do one to be an absolute true expert. And then you say, oh, well, it's Facebook. What doing what? Oh, it's actually building Facebook marketing videos to get really profitable businesses up and running. You know, so that's what you're gonna do.
So the other traditional markers are just that, the key performance indicators, the BANT, the budget, authority, need, and time. Those are structures that you need to incorporate regardless of what your business is going to be, because that's how businesses are run. Is that correct?
Absolutely, the basic key things. So the sales pipeline is crucial. Knowing how to pitch yourself so you can close deals with clients is also very important. We teach you how to do that in the right way. And also the other basic things such as budget forecasting and putting together an infrastructure, which is very easy to do when you know what it is. I didn't know that at first when I first started the company, but no one does. It's always hindsight. But my business coach, Jolanda Miliotto, is like an absolute legend. So that was brilliant.
So how does somebody best do that elevator pitch and pitch themselves?
Well, the key thing with an elevator pitch is summarize what your business does, but then let the potential client do the talking. So you actually only speak 80% of the time. The 20% is the client, because you've got to ask them the questions of, so what are you having problems with? Where are you finding blocks? And then you could then explain how you solve those problems and get rid of those blocks by doing X.
Right, the pain points, right?
Yes.
Which is like spin selling.
Yep.
So you also have cosmic ordering, manifesting and then kind of listing specific goals, whether it be daily, hourly, monthly, or whatever. How does that kind of funnel work?
So cosmic ordering is a really interesting and unique kind of technique that I incorporate into my business. I mention it in the book how to do it. But cosmic ordering is a little bit different to manifestation. It's not a case of you obviously manifestation, you visualize clearly what you want and then you affirm what you want and very specific. This is asking. So Ellen Watts taught me this when I was probably about 3 years ago. And then she said, what you do is you say, what I really want is, and then you say what you want. And then at the end you say, for the good of all concerned. That way no one loses out for you to get. And then in the business sense, I do it in this way. So each morning I have my goals and I turn my goals into orders. So I always say what I really want is for a minimum of one of my films to be accepted into a film festival today for the good of all concerned. So I don't go too like precise and go, I want it to be this film in this festival, because that can be you don't want to be too controlling. It's more a case of like, well, I've put everything out there, so let me just ask and it'll come back. And specific is important though. So I'm obviously saying no less than one of my films to get into a festival. It's like when you go to a restaurant, I want chips with cheese. Not, if you want cheese, you've got to ask. So it's important to be clear, but also not too specifically and control things. Has to be very, what's the word? Flexible.
Got it. I always find that one of the challenges and obstacles that people have when working on their quote unquote manifesting is that they are blocked from receiving.
Yes.
They're great at asking and they're great at wanting, but they're not that good at receiving. Any thoughts on that? I know it's kind of just threw that out there, but.
No, it's a brilliant question. And it is, because when you're so attached and get wobbly, that means that you can then subconsciously block it because you're not being able to see things differently, or you miss things coming in. So yes, it's important to trust. So when you place the order, you let go and you trust, and get rid of it, it's gone, and then you trust it and it'll come back, and you'll come. Sometimes the orders and what you ask for comes in a different way to what you expect. So whereas you want it to be this way, it could come a different way. So for example, I placed that order when my films get into a festival, and I thought, well, I'm not due to hear back from any festivals today, so I want to ask her to come in. But I thought, well, I'm not going to think about the how, I'm going to just like ask and do it. And then like about 3 hours later, we got an email from a contact of ours who said, oh, thanks so much for linking through the link of the film, we loved it, can we screen it? And I was like, but that was, again, it was an email that did that, not the I should hear back from this festival today on my schedule. It's like, things come in the ways and you used to expect.
It's interesting. It's like a story, right? A good story, you get the ending that you want, but not in the way you expect it, right?
Exactly. And that's all this way.
So my special guest, Rebekah Louisa Smith, Dr. Rebekah Louisa Smith. The book, again, is Born to Do It, Becoming the Leader of a Business Niche Using Powerful Spiritual Techniques. And the book has a lot of nice exercises on it. It allows you to kind of stay on track with some guideposts there and some things you fill out. And I think it's very practical and helpful. And I love the fact that you put together the spiritual aspects and considerations, if you will, along with the traditional business considerations, because if you want to be successful, you probably have to do both. So final question for you, Dr. Smith, would be, what would be your advice? 3 things to do if you're going to launch a business, real quick.
3 things to do would be 1, always know that you have a market for your business. You have a thriving market where you can fit in and your service is in demand. Okay. Number 2 is before doing anything, before trying to get any new clients, is always perfect and research what your sales pitch is. And number 3, always integrate spiritual techniques, because that way you'll find it a very enjoyable process and less stressful.
I love it. Fantastic answer. And thank you for being on Guys Radio. Tell everybody where they can find out more about you and your book.
My website, which is RebekahLouisaSmith.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at RebekahFilmDR.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much for being on Guys Radio. Dr. Rebekah Louisa Smith.
Thank you.